Hello, everybody. Welcome into the final segment here of Fantasy Fest 2023. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined by some awesome guests, as we have been doing all day long. It's not quite 7 hours of commercial-free football, but it is several hours of fantasy football goodness. So I really appreciate everybody who has tuned in at any point during this year's Fantasy Fest. We are wrapping things up with a mock draft. This is PPR. And we're going up against the listeners. We've got 9 listeners. I am not a part of the draft. I'm just steering the ship, which means we have 3 of the brightest minds in fantasy football, or at the very least, 2 of the brightest minds in fantasy football, and also Joey P. Joe Pisapia is joining us. He's been hosting pretty much all day long, so now he gets to sit in the analyst chair here. We've also got Pat Fitzmaurice from FantasyPros, and our big guest is Marcus Grant from the NFL Network. Marcus, do you have a strategy here to come in and dominate this mock draft against the rest of us?
I'm just trying to hold on, man. I'm drafting against Joe and Pat. And like, here's the thing. You guys know this. I remember the first time I did a listener league, like we invited listeners from our podcast. And I remember being shocked at like how many of the guys I thought were sleepers were getting sniped from under me. And then I realized that, oh yeah, all these people listen to the podcast. They know who I like. I was shook the first time.
It makes it that much harder. There's also more pressure on you when you're in the industry and you're going up against just folks who actually listen to you. I'll start running through just to give everybody a shout out who's actually in the draft, and then we'll get going here. I apologize if I mispronounce any of these names from the users. We've got Kyle T. Bellman. We've got DVR66. We've got the Ron Dynasty. We've got Joey P. He's drafted in the 104 spot. We've got Cooper Mick77. We've got Marcus at 106. We've got the FF Chef, Chadwick James, Dat Harris Magic. Pat Fitzmaurice is at 110. Super Laser Seth, and then Andrew Pizzola. So we will be starting here in just a couple seconds. Pat, it's been a long day of the fest. Do you feel good wrapping this up here with the mock draft?
Oh, I do, Ryan. And like one final mock, squeeze it in with the listeners. And like Marcus was saying, I'm always shocked at how sharp the listeners are. Like they're just sniping me right and left in these mocks. It's frustrating.
We are getting started here with Kyle on the clock. Fantasy Fest 2023 is brought to you by Betting Pros. So thank you to our friends over on the other side of the aisle at Betting Pros for sponsoring today's show. We've got the 2 wide receivers I think most people expect, Jefferson and Chase, off the board first here. Joe, you're here at the 104. Is there a guy you've got in mind now that you're on the clock here?
Yes, there is. And I just want to echo the sentiments. I'm used to drafting against all these people constantly in our mock draft rooms on Discord. So I know exactly how hard this is. So I am ready to bring the A game. I have a choice here. It's PPR between Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill. I'm going to just take my boy Tyreek Hill because at the end of the day, I'm asking, Cooper Kupp to stay healthy, and I'm asking Stafford to stay healthy, and I think that's a lot to ask if I don't have to. I like Cooper Kupp if I can get him at 6, 7, 8, but in the top 4, if Tyreek Hill is still available, I'm going to go with Tyreek Hill because I think there's an outside chance that he, could finish as the wide receiver 1 this year too, especially with the target volume, and we already know what this offense is. I mean, it's Tyreek Hill, it's Jalen Waddle, and it's speed and speed and speed, and I don't think it's going to be any different than last year. Who knows? It could even be better if Tua's health cooperates a little bit too. And I know people say, well, that's a problem too. How can you say you're worried about Stafford, not worried about Tua? I am worried about Tua, but the Mike White pivot doesn't scare me as much as the Stetson Bennett one. And that's the end of the day, that's the tiebreaker.
Yeah. Kupp goes immediately after you. And then Marcus, you take Travis Kelce. Is that the guy you were targeting at the 6th pick?
I was interested because I had my eye on one of 3 guys. It was Travis Kelce, it was Cooper Kupp, it was Austin Eckler. Kupp went right before me, so that sort of took him out of play. And then I sort of went back and forth, and I just like at that 6th spot taking Travis Kelce. And that feels like a good. I'm of the opinion that I want to tight end early because I don't want to have to deal with streaming and trying to like figure out who's going to score a touchdown in any given week. So 6 is about where I'm okay with taking Kelce. So it just sort of landed in my lap, and I did that instead of the Eckler move.
Bijan Robinson goes immediately after Marcus, then Austin Eckler. I think that's a fairly standard top 8 you'll see in most drafts of this format. Stephon Diggs goes 9, and then Fitz, you took a wide receiver with your first pick here at 110.
CeeDee Lamb, and I've got him ranked pretty close to Stephon Diggs. I've actually got him one spot ahead of Diggs, who went right before me here, and we've got a baseline for Diggs. We know what his ceiling is. We've seen it. We've gotten it consistently, which is great. But I think the elevator is still going up for CeeDee Lamb. We got the breakout season last year, but I don't think that's the best season he's ever going to have. I think the elevator can still go higher.
3 more receivers go off up leading into your next pick. Amon-Ra St. Brown, then Saquon Barkley, then Garrett Wilson and A.J. Brown. So Fitz, you're on the clock again. I don't know if you were looking at doubling up at wide receiver, but maybe something came off the board, or are you looking at a different position?
Yeah, I doubled up. I just tapped Devontae Adams, and it was close. There were a couple of running backs I was considering there, but knowing how important the wide receiver position is in this format, and knowing I'm not going to pick again for quite a long time, I took Devontae. And I think just in terms of pure talent, like arguably one of the best, the very best in the league. He's right up there with Jefferson and Chase.
Yeah. So Marcus, in the first round, we had Travis Kelce, of course, went to you. Then we had 4 running backs and the rest were wide receivers. Does that feel like the right ratio to you in the first round that most people will see in their leagues?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how it's going to go. And I'm just kind of going back and looking through the names. I mean, McCaffrey, Robinson, Eckler, Barkley. Maybe you interchange Barkley with Chubb, but I mean, I think you still see those 4 guys coming off the board. It still blows my mind, right? Because 3 to 5 years ago, it was the other way. We were talking about, 8 to 10 running backs and maybe a couple of wide receivers and a tight end. Unless we're talking, prime Gronk. It just wasn't a thing that was happening. So I'm still sort of trying to wrap my head around this right now.
Yeah. You're on the clock here. After Fitz's pick, we had Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, and Chris Olave, who I love. That is earlier than I think I've seen him go in other mocks, but I really do love that pick. And Marcus, you go with Devontae Smith. What was your thought there?
Yeah, I was looking at him. I know Jalen Waddle was still on the board. I think Smith is going to have a bigger role in his offense than Waddle will in his. I mean, look, I do like the Dolphins' passing game is fairly narrowly funneled, but I still think Tyreek Hill sucks more oxygen out of that one than A.J. Brown does out of the atmosphere in Philly. I look at A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and they are sort of 1 and 1A, whereas I think Tyreek Hill is a definite alpha in Miami. So I think I'd rather have the guy that I feel like is going to get a closer, have a similar target share to the guy that's considered the wide receiver 1 in his offense.
So Joey P just took Keenan Allen. Jalen Waddle did go between those 2 picks, by the way, which means that all 3 of our analysts have yet to take a running back here through the first 2 rounds. Joe, did you want to double up on wide receiver? That was your goal, or was it just that the board was kind of, left not very full?
I did want to double up on wide receiver, and the problem is this, because of all the uncertainty now with Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor, they keep sliding down in drafts, and now people are just saying, well, I'm just going to pivot to wide receiver, and that's what I want to do. So I don't like this at all. And it's getting harder and harder if you're an early rounder here, an early, first, second, third pick in your draft to do that strategy. Like you have to start looking, say, well, do I want to take Hurts or Mahomes here? Or do I want to just pivot off of this completely and just go with the big quarterback? I think you're seeing that in some expert league drafts and some NFFC drafts too. You're seeing in some of these quarterbacks are going off the board earlier than normal. And I think that's why. It's because people look at the value in this board and say, look, there's running backs I like later that I can get by with. But a big part of what's going on now, I think, is just that, which is those 2 players all of a sudden now have pushed all of a sudden later into drafts. And that means now they're available. So you have to make that decision. And to be frank, I don't want to make that decision. Like, I don't want to take Josh Jacobs off the enormous workload. I just don't want to do it. And the Jonathan Taylor situation is so fluid, it still scares the crap out of me. And I don't want to do that with my first few picks. I'd rather take another shot at somebody that I think has enormous upside. So after I went ahead and I selected Keenan Allen, who I think has a really good floor, potentially if he stays healthy, and a huge upside as well. Just a steady wide receiver too, like a 1A guy. And then I'm going to go and throw the dart at Calvin Ridley and hope he can be that guy that all of a sudden does jump back into that wide receiver 1 conversation. If so, then I'm looking at a team where I've begun with 3 top wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, and Calvin Ridley, and then I'm going to build off of that.
Yes, the guys go in between those picks. Mark Andrews, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor at the end of round 2. Then we have a couple quarterbacks off the board, Jalen Hurts, then Josh Jacobs, then Patrick Mahomes, then back to you with Ridley, then Ramondre Stevenson. Marcus, you are on the clock here, so I'll let you make your pick, but I'm also curious what you think about Jonathan Taylor going in the second round.
I think that's about where it should be because, as Joe mentioned, there's so much ambiguity about his situation right now. I will say though, if I'm looking at Jonathan Taylor or if I'm looking at Josh Jacobs, this is where I think it helps to sort of be on the turn, right? Because I've done this in drafts where if I'm at the turn, if I'm at the very end, or maybe somewhere, if I'm at 2 or I'm at 11, something like that, I will go and I'll take a Taylor or a Jacobs, but then I'll come back around and maybe double up with like a Ramondre Stevenson or somebody that I know for sure is going to be there and know what their role is going to be. So it sort of works as insurance. I'm getting 2 running backs close to each other, one that I for sure know is going to be there, one that I hope is going to be there and productive. And if it sort of works out by the grace of the fantasy gods that both of these guys are there, then I feel great about my running back situation. So me sitting at 6, I wouldn't have done it because, you take Jacobs and who knows what happens. And then I'm stuck waiting for a long time to come back around. But if I know my pick's coming back real soon, I'm willing to kind of take that swing there.
And then you did end up taking Amari Cooper here. What was your thought process there?
I didn't really love the running backs that were available, at least not at that spot. I could have maybe, there's a guy on the board that I sort of looked at, but there were a lot of guys there that I just didn't love in that place. So I'm like, well, let me just take a guy that I know is going to get a ton of targets in an offense that is going to be a little more pass heavy. I know there have been reports that at times it's looked a little bit disjointed there in practice, hoping they sort of shake off that rust and get it going, because when that happens, I think Cooper's in for a lot of targets in a big year.
A little wide receiver run here in the back half of the third round. Amari Cooper to Marcus, then DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, DeAndre Hopkins, and then Fitz breaks up that run with a running back.
Yeah, Najee Harris. And I know a lot of sharp people, sharp analysts are not really in on Najee this year. And I don't really understand it because we saw him really pick up the pace last season after he got better from the Lisfranc injury that was undoubtedly bothering him early in the season, even though he downplayed it. Steelers have upgraded their offensive line, and their offense has looked terrific so far in the preseason. Like, I'm excited about it. A lot of people think Jalen Warren's going to have a much bigger role this year, but I'm not really worried about him cutting into Najee's workload that much. And, it helps that Najee is pretty much indestructible. Hasn't missed a game yet in his pro career so far.
A couple more running backs go off the board to wrap up round 3. Joe Mixon and Jahmyr Gibbs, who went in the mid-second round in my FFPC draft last night.
Wow.
So I had no chance of getting him. Josh Allen then to start off round 4, then Aaron Jones, and then Fitz takes my guy, Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I just couldn't turn down the value. There were some wide receivers I liked there, but Lamar, I feel like there's a big 4. I know some people think it's a big 3 at quarterback, but I think it's a big 4 with Lamar there too. And I'm just excited about the trajectory of that offense with a coordinator who actually believes in the forward pass.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Obviously, I'm a Ravens fan, but that aside, I'm just so excited for this offense and everybody in it, really. And I'm with you. As soon as that third QB goes off the board, I'm basically taking Lamar with my next pick every single time. ETN goes next. We are waiting here on Chadwick James. So Fitz, you're now 4 picks in: Lamb, Adams, Harris, and Jackson. How do you feel about that as a foursome to start off your draft?
Yeah, so far so good. I'm a little worried about what might be there at wide receiver coming back to me, but I'm pretty pleased with the start.
Joe Burrow goes off the board next, then DJ Moore, which brings us to Marcus's pick.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a pickle right here. I'm seeing a lot of names that I'm sort of in love with, but not 100%. Not really super interested in reaching. So I'm gonna homer it up, and I'm gonna get my fill at least one of my quota of USC Trojans in this one and take Drake London. Look, again, talk about narrowly funneled passing games, right? In Atlanta, it looks like it's pretty much going to be Kyle Pitts and Drake London with some Bijan probably sprinkled in there a little bit. So that part sort of makes me feel okay. The one thing that sort of makes me nervous is we talk about, the people, those of us who still like Kyle Pitts and who are still in on Drake London, we keep saying that it's going to be better, right? We keep hoping it's going to be better. And I think right now, the biggest qualification for Desmond Ridder is that he's not Marcus Mariota. And I don't know how much of an endorsement that really is, but it feels like that's been the logic. Hey man, it's not Marcus Mariota. It's got to be better. And does it? I don't know. but I'm willing to sort of believe in that right now. And look, to get London is kind of a secondary receiver, I'm willing to kind of take that chance.
Chris Godwin goes immediately after London, and then Joey.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, if I didn't take Lamar Jackson, I was taking Drake London 4 picks earlier. So I love that makes me feel better.
Joey P finally goes away from wide receiver with Breece Hall.
Yeah, look, I think the Dalvin Cook signing is a good thing for them to have in September, but I'm looking ahead. There's a lot of football past, September where I think eventually Breece Hall, gets back on track, and I'm looking, trying to play the long game here with this. And I guess also I've learned in this round that I guess because I'm on Najee Harris this year, that I am not a sharp fantasy analyst, as Fitz put it, because a lot of these sharp guys are off of him. So I've learned that. The other thing that I'm coming to realize too is, we start to do more of these drafts this particular week, is that because of the injuries to Jerry Jeudy, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Terry McLaurin, all of a sudden that nice kind of cushy wide receiver 2 middle has really starting to got, I would say, a little prickly. And I'm very happy to maybe overpay for Ridley if I have to, because waiting for guys to come back healthy is always a difficult thing, especially injuries like turf toe and hamstring issues and stuff like that. So the other great thing is looking at the draft wizard and using the insights too. I know, I have my eye on a quarterback here. If he makes it back to me, and I think he will, because 2 of the 3 teams after me have a quarterback, and the draft insights draft wizard lets me know that. Thank goodness, because there's a lot of things going on when you have a 30-second clock, and I'm happy so far with how it's going.
Joe just can't help himself from plugging our tools seamlessly. It's brilliant. It's every time. I want to point out quickly, you're back on the clock here, Joe. Of the first 49 picks in this draft, 26 of them are wide receivers. That's more than half. It is very wide receiver heavy early on. After your Breece Hall pick, we had Ayuk, Deontay Johnson, Deebo Samuel, Christian Watson, TJ Hawkinson, Terry McLaurin, and then you get your quarterback, Joe.
Yes, Justin Fields. Let's go. Let's have some fun. I always say, there's 2 ways to approach quarterback. I either want to get in on the end of that first run, if it's Burrow, if it's Lamar, if it's Fields, however that ends up working itself, whatever the room dictates the value to me. And then, maybe you get a good value on Herbert or Lawrence. Otherwise, the late pivot is trying to be a little aggressive on Richardson, and then just take a boring old, vanilla quarterback like Cousins or Jared Goff, and just kind of get yourself a little insurance policy. But look, Fields last year was a guy that got so many teams to the playoffs. There were teams that were buried that picked him up off the waiver wire last year and just ended up just running through the competition for 7 weeks. That rushing equity is just too much to give up.
Yeah. Herbert goes next. Marcus, would you have considered either Fields or Herbert if they got back to you? Or since you already took Kelsey early, is that kind of your lone luxury pick at QB or tight end?
Yeah, I think that's it. Once Lamar Jackson went, at that point, I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to sit and just kind of wait. And I've got my eye on a couple of guys that I think I can get a little bit later. So I had loaded up on wide receiver. I got my tight end. I went with Dameon Pierce, who every day I get bigger and bigger on this guy. It looks like he's just kind of separating himself from Devin Singletary there in Houston. And I remember early in the offseason, he said he was like watching Christian McCaffrey tapes so he could become a better pass catcher. And I was kind of like, all right, man, sure. But sort of watching, like kind of reading the tea leaves and seeing what I've seen out of Houston, I do think he's going to get a more significant role in their passing game. It's a run scheme that came over from San Francisco. We know how good their running backs have been. So like I said, the closer we get to the start of the season, the more I am in on Dameon Pierce.
I love that pick as well. He's my favorite running back in round 5 that I've been getting in a lot of drafts. A couple more running backs go immediately after him. Cam Akers, Miles Sanders, then Darren Waller. He's the 4th tight end off the board. We're here in late round 5 with Pat, who just made his pick with Kenneth Walker here at the 5'10".
Yeah, maybe a little bit of falling value. Kind of wanted to take a receiver here, but it's all devolved into a certain tier, and I think I can wait and someone else a couple picks later. But I'm a little concerned about Zach Charbonnet's presence. Like, we know Pete Carroll runs a total meritocracy in Seattle, and if Charbonnet is good, he's going to play. But Walker already showed us he's pretty good last year, so I have no doubt he's going to play a role, and I have no real doubt about Pete Carroll's commitment to the running game.
Well, I hope you weren't eyeing a wide receiver with your next pick, because that's the only position that was taken between your 2 picks. Mike Williams, Jerry Jeudy, even off the injury, Jahan Dotson, and Tyler Lockett, which brings us back to Fitz here in early round 6.
Oh, man. I'm gonna take George Pickens, who's a guy I've sort of warmed up to lately. I mean, he just looks so good. I mean, this guy might be a superstar in the making, and I'm worried that he had a small target share last year. Never drew more than 8 targets in any game after week 6. I don't think he drew more than 6 targets in any game. But, man, this guy is just a bully out there. And, again, the Pittsburgh offense looks really good. Now I've got 2 stakes in it with Najee and Pickens. I'm okay with that. The upside here is so great. And, we're playing for upside. We're trying to win leagues.
Joe, as we wait for some picks to be made here in the middle of the 6th round, is there any team other than yours, just when you look at the board quickly, that you really like?
No. Oh, no, of course. Well, the first thing I just want to point out, too, can we all take into account now the 6th round value that Jahan Dotson's getting? And rightfully so, all that helium that's moving in his direction, especially after the McLaurin injury, it's probably due, but it's just something to notice. That stock is moving, everybody. I think the beginning if I'm down at the turn area, what Super's doing there, Super Laser is doing with Amon-Ra, AJ Brown back to back, and then the 2 running backs after Mixon and Jones. That's a very Joey P build right there. And then comes back with Mike Williams and Tyler Lockett, where it's just like hammering and hammering. That's my approach down at the bottom, because that's really where the value typically rests. Like, you can hammer top 2 wide receivers, and then on the way back, there's going to probably be 2 of those 1A running backs left, and you double tap them, and that's what they did. So I really like what Super's doing there.
Yeah. After Pickens, we got Christian Kirk, Mike Evans, Trevor Lawrence goes in the 6th round. I really like that value. And then Marcus took James Conner for his 2nd running back.
Yeah, another guy that I'm really into, just because, look, we all know the Cardinals are going to be bad. Look, I'm going to be at the USC San Jose State game on Saturday, where I'll be watching next year's starting Cardinals quarterback, Caleb Williams, do his thing. But even with a bad offense, we always talk about how volume is so important for running backs, and Connor's going to get a ton of it. Now, as I was waffling between him and James Cook, and I was like sort of crossing my fingers that maybe Cook. No, he went 2 picks later. I was back and forth between the 2 of them and praying that maybe if I had some good luck, Cook would come back. But obviously, somebody had their eye on him as well. So, but I'm cool with
somebody was Joey P.
There you go. I'm cool with James Conner in the spot here too.
Yeah, we have Alexander Madison went between the 2 picks. Joe, would you have taken Conner or Madison, or did you want Cook all along?
No, I want to Cook all along. That's the guy that I want there. And I'm so mad because DVR, who's one of our people from Discord, who I actually invited into our Black Book Charity League, which just actually raised $600 for the Hawaiian relief effort. Great job by us there. Great crew.
That's awesome.
Because one of our league mates there is actually from Hawaii, and he's working closely on the rebuild stuff. So usually we do St. Jude's, but this year we did it all for the Hawaii fund. But I'm so mad because I figured, this is going to be great. I'm going to take Cook, and then Zay Flowers will make it back to me. No, right after he sniped me and took him away. DVR, we're going to have words after this. I'm going to hit you up on Discord because how dare you? How dare you? But look, I like Cook, and to be honest, J.K. Dobbins was still on the board too, and Draft Wizard wanted me to take him. And I sat down with Draft Wizard, and we had a little conversation. And the conversation is this. I think that, in the PPR league, Cook has more of the upside that if I look at the end of the year, do I see a path for Dobbins to finish as a low-end RB1? I think that's going to be a tough sell, because if he's not really going to catch the football, I think, in this offense. Whereas Cook can, and Cook has the explosive plays. And as camp has gone on, I think the Damian Harris love has started to fade a little bit. And I feel like the James Cook hype train is starting to gain traction. It's year 2. And I think sometimes you have you take your time a little bit in the league. Sometimes not everybody hits right away. I think maybe second year for Cook is going to be a good situation.
Yeah, you're back on the clock here, Joe. I'll just recap the picks between, because it's a lot of names I really love. Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, J.K. Dobbins, Kyle Pitts, Cortland Sutton, Rashad White. That is a very tasty section of the draft to me, with a lot of really high ceiling guys. Zay being the first rookie wide receiver off the board is interesting. Obviously, JSN has his own injury he's dealing with, but he's really shined in this preseason. Again, just that Ravens offense. And then, Joe, you took Elijah Moore. Was he the guy that you wanted once Zay Flowers went off the board?
It was, but man, my Q just got obliterated there. Like right after I took James Cook, like I had Flowers, I had Dobbins in there, Kyle Pitts in there, and they just gone. My consolation prize is Elijah Moore, who I think is going to be really good in that Browns offense. I'd love to hear Marcus's thoughts, because he took Amari Cooper earlier. But for me, if I want a piece of the potential resurrection of the career of Deshaun Watson this year, then I kind of want the Elijah Moore piece, because I think it's a lot cheaper to find out if it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, he's just my flex guy. I can move on from it. Whereas if I got to pay wide receiver 1-ish price for Cooper, I think that's a tough sell, because if it doesn't work out, then we've moved backwards a lot with our build. So I don't know where Marcus is with those 2 wide receivers. Do you have a certain feeling about Elijah Moore this year at all, Marcus?
I do like Elijah Moore. And I think you're right in terms of the price. I was willing to take that shot on Amari Cooper, and especially because, look, I've got Devontae Smith. I surrounded him with Drake London. So I feel like I've got some guys that hopefully can pick up the slack in case Deshaun Watson doesn't resurrect himself. Although I really do believe he can't be as bad as he was last year.
I keep telling myself, but I don't know.
It can't be as bad as it was last year.
Yeah.
So that's been my big reason for getting in on either one of those guys. I will say this, in best ball, I did put together a lot of, at least at the time, fairly cheap, either Cooper Watson Njoku stacks, or even better, like the more Njoku Watson stacks. And at least early in best ball draft season, you could get those pretty affordably.
Marcus, so far your team is Kelsey, Devontae Smith, Amari Cooper, Drake London, Damian Pierce, James Conner, and then you just took Alvin Kamara. As a whole, how would you kind of grade your first half of your draft here to date?
I think this is a team that, look, I can see this team maybe sort of starting slow, but I feel like mid-season, this thing really starts to kick into gear a little bit. I like it. I hadn't planned to start out this way, but, after I started with Kelsey and Smith, it just sort of felt, that's kind of what was happening. When I'm like, I'm going to wait on the running backs. I know I can get some good ones sort of in the 5th to 7th, 8th round, something like that. And then I'll figure out my quarterback situation as we go along.
Catching up here, we're here in the early 8th round, but going for the middle of the 7th, we have Isaiah Pacheco, Michael Pittman, Daniel Jones. Fitz takes George Kittle, Javonte Williams, Dallas Goedert, Jackson Smith-Njigba, David Montgomery, and then Fitz takes Gabe Davis. So Kittle and Davis, Pat, what were you looking for there?
Yeah, Kittle is some falling value at tight end. So I know he's dealing with a groin injury, but a late 7th round pick. I'm pretty pleased with the value there still. I don't think he's going to score 11 more touchdowns after never having scored more than 6 in any other season, but he's still one of the better tight ends. And then Gabe Davis. So my decision was made slightly easier by Super Laser Seth, who took David Montgomery right in front of me. It was either going to be Monty or Gabe Davis, and I think we're maybe going to get the breakout or semi-breakout season we were expecting from Gabe Davis last year, this year, now that he is, not going to be hindered by a high ankle sprain.
Antonio Gibson, Pat Freiermuth, Evan Engram, and then Marcus, I was going to ask, is this where you finally pull the trigger on a quarterback? And it is.
Yeah, it is. Joe talking about, us sort of banking on Deshaun Watson coming back. I wanted to pair him up with Amari Cooper. So I'm sort of all in, right? Like I've committed to this whole bit. So either this thing works or I fall on my face completely. But you know what? This is the time of year, right? We're planting flags and we're making claims. So this is the claim for me that the Browns passing game is going to be improved over what we've seen before.
It's the Ricky Bobby strategy. If you're not first, you're last.
Not first, you're last.
We don't play for 5th place here.
Side note, I don't know if you guys saw this. Christopher Nolan, director, Oppenheimer, Inception, all that stuff. He said one of his drop the remote and stop everything movies is Talladega Nights.
Yes, really? I saw that reel. Yep.
Which blew me away. I'm like, the dude who did the Dark Knight and Oppenheimer loves Ricky Bobby.
Well, I think you need a palate cleanser, right? I mean, a long day at work on Memento. I think you want to watch a little Ricky Bobby,
That's exactly, when you've twisted your brain in knots making Tenet, you just want something where you don't have to think.
Yeah, from the guy who brought you Memento and Tenet. Yeah. I did not hear that. That's incredible. Brandon Cooks goes next. And then Joe, you get the other guy in the Jets backfield.
I did. Look, I think when some of these single quarterback drafts go on, I think you can afford to have one expenditure. Either you're going to pay for a premium quarterback, which I did, or a premium tight end. It's very rare that I will pay for both, because then you're missing out too much on the running back and wide receiver depth. And you could see as some of these rosters are getting built, you kind of have to make that decision of which one you're going to do, and then play later on and say, okay, do I want to play the tight end wagon later with some of those late round pick guys and maybe somebody hits, or do I want to do the same thing with quarterback? My problem with doing it at quarterback is you're just going to be so far behind the people who have the elite quarterbacks on a weekly basis, like Mahomes and Hurts, and those guys are just going to pound their opponents into submission. And I took Dalvin Cook here because, look, I've already got Breece Hall. So if I am in a bind there where he is slow in September, or you see they come out and they're like, hey, we're going to measure his carries early on, then I have no problem throwing Dalvin Cook there early in the season, because Dalvin Cook still put up a fair amount of numbers last year. I'm not one to typically handcuff running back situations. This one in particular just kind of fell on my lap in terms of the value on the board, and it just made sense. So if anything happens to Hall, like he struggles for some reason, then Cook's the guy, well, okay, I end up still getting a guy who's a low-end RB1 potentially. And then obviously, looking forward here back on the board, this is a spot now too where, once again, I've got to look to what the upside of running back is. Of course, I got sniped again. Sky Moore goes off the board, which I thought would be a lock. So once again, we're drafting with the users. This is what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and take Zach Charbonnet, who I think the Seahawks are telling you something with this draft pick. I think he is the more complete back. And I think, as Marcus said, time goes on, you're trying to be patient with certain investments you make. I think Charbonnet is one of those patient investments that I think by week 8, 9, 10 starts to pay off.
Yeah, Joe, just really quickly, you say that you don't like taking kind of both luxury picks early. I just want to shout out, I think the Ron Dynasty is having a great draft. He started with Christian McCaffrey, then he goes Mark Andrews, tight end, and then Mahomes, quarterback. So 2 luxury picks in the first 3 rounds. But then you got Ayuk, McLaurin, Zay Flowers, Rashad White, Khalil Herbert. I think that's a lot of talent at a lot of positions for him. So I really like what he's done.
It is. Far. If McLaurin's healthy too, but that turf toe stuff sometimes lingers for weeks and weeks. And
it's a fair concern.
I think that's a great example, Ryan, of a roster that is trying to do the premiums there and doing it the right way, because they are threading the needle at wide receiver, though, because I'm telling you, Judy, JSN, McLaurin, some of these guys now, and during the year with question marks, that soft middle of wide receiver that we like all of a sudden just got blown up.
So Marcus was not the last person to take a quarterback, but one of the last. He is the first person to take a second quarterback here. David Njoku went after Zach Charbonnet, and then Marcus takes Geno Smith.
Yeah, and honestly, if Charbonnet was there, that would have been my pick. So Joe sort of made the decision easy for me. At that point, I felt like, all right, I as much as I believe in Watson, I'm also not crazy. Let me get some insurance. Let me get somebody that I feel like, let me give somebody I feel like I can, sort of count on in case things go sideways in Cleveland. And I really do think the Seahawks are more in on trying to throw the football. Now, I know JSN is hurt, but I think when he's back, I think you're going to see a lot more 3 wide receiver sets out of this team than we're used to from a Pete Carroll squad. I just think drafting JSN, giving Geno the big contract suggests they want to be a little bit more pass heavy than they have been in the past. And so I don't think last year was a fluke. So I'm willing to have Geno as sort of that security blanket just in case Deshaun Watson does not perform. And here's the thing, I'll just say it. I would have taken Anthony Richardson, but I felt like that's too much of a gamble on both ends there. I feel like Geno at least gives me a safer floor, whereas I believe in Anthony Richardson, but not after I sort of went a little bit more risky with Deshaun Watson.
I think that makes sense. I'm getting Richardson in a lot of places where I intend to take a better quarterback, and then they just go earlier than I expected. And I say, I'll just go with the pure upside. But to your point, and Joe referenced this earlier, I want to pair him with a Kirk Cousins type, not another really, kind of risky quarterback. Samaje Perine goes after Geno, then Treylon Burks, Michael Thomas, and then Fitz with Brian Robinson. Antonio Gibson already off the board. You take the other Washington running back.
Oh, man, I can't even pretend to feign enthusiasm about this one. I just needed safe, bring running back depth. But then Andrew Pizzola, 2 spots behind me, compounds my lack of excitement by taking Rashad Bateman, the guy I kind of wanted to come back with to pick Lamar Jackson. So that kind of blew up in my face. Now Romeo Doubs goes, the other guy I kind of wanted here. So, man, talk about being in a pickle and regretting a pick. Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to go with, I'm just going to take an upside swing with Jameson Williams here. I don't love this pick at all, but
clearly a part of the draft that Fitz loves
right now.
Yeah. Tua and Kadarius Toney, just for housekeeping, also went between Fitz's 2 picks. Not that he was targeting those guys. So again, that's Brian Robinson, Tua, Rashad Bateman to end round 9, Kadarius Toney to start round 10, Romeo Doubs, and then Jameson Williams. Now Tyler Boyd, again, extremely wide receiver heavy. Pretty much every round, that's the position that's going most often off the board. Marcus, is there a guy that you're hoping falls to here in the next 3 picks?
There is. I'm not going to say his name out loud for fear that he gets snatched out from under me. But I do. I've got my eye on somebody for this next upcoming pick.
Jamal Williams goes. I like that in the 10th round, actually quite a bit. We got one more pick before Marcus here. Fitz just overall. AJ Dillon goes here. Fitz overall. How you feeling about your team?
Oh, much less confident than I was 2 picks ago, Ryan. Yeah, the Brian Robinson and then, having like everyone else go out of my queue after that was kind of was kind of tough. So not great at the moment. Not great, Bob.
Yeah. Marcus, was Jaylen Warren your target?
Jaylen Warren was the target there. So, I'm raising my hand. I'm one of the quote unquote sharps who's not big on Najee Harris, and Jaylen Warren is sort of the reason why. I mean, everything suggests that he's been playing well, that he's going to get opportunities, even from the start of training camp. A lot of the beat reporters were saying it just looks like it's going to be hard to keep Warren off the field. Now, I don't know what this means necessarily for standalone week-to-week value for him. I think he definitely sort of makes life frustrating for Najee Harris. And if for some reason Najee is no longer a tank and no longer indestructible, then Warren walks into an even bigger opportunity.
Look at Marcus just
Anthony
salting
Richardson
my wound.
Anthony Richardson does go off the board after the Warren pick. He's QB 13 in this mock draft. I think that's too low. Like if he starts every game this season, I don't see any way he's not a QB1. The rushing upside is just too immense. But although, again, I definitely get this core of the strategy Marcus had in addressing the position. And then, Joe, you take the rookie, Devon Achane.
Yeah, speed kills. Let's go. That boy fast. I just want to I'm excited about Achane more now because I already know what Wilson and Mostert, are going to be this year. They're going to have a couple moments and then they'll be hurt. And look, Devon Achane, I know the shoulder injury is a little bit of an issue right now. They say it's a week-to-week thing, so it's not a serious one. Had Richardson made it to me, I had him all queued up to take, even though I already had Fields, and the reason is the draft is for taking talent. I'm going to take Richardson because at that point should not be on the board. And this is why you price and force in drafts, because if a player falls too far with the talent, even though you don't need, I don't need him, quote unquote, but then it gives me flexibility where if Richardson becomes the man, I could trade Fields and I can get a lot for Fields. I can get 2 players for Fields from somebody, even a single quarterback league, because he's a big advantage. Or if Richardson becomes this hot, sexy name and everybody wants him, I'll trade him instead. So to me, that's where things start to make sense in terms of when you get late into the drafts. It's not just about filling out roster spots. It's about getting the talent on your roster. It is a long season. And what if Fields gets hurt? Oh, my goodness. I don't miss a beat because then I got Richardson. So I'd rather draft the talent. And I know Draft Wizard's going to yell at me here, but I don't care because I'm using my cheat sheets and I'm taking Rashee Rice from the Kansas City Chiefs because I believe in this kid. I love the tape on him coming out of college. I liked his college career as well. I think that it's pretty clear that MVS is, on his way out here. It's time to turn things over to the youth. And Kadarius Toney's not a piece I believe in. I wanted Sky Moore. That did not happen. So now I at least get my piece of the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver core here late.
Joe, you were talking about Devon Achane and the speed down there. Look, I don't know if Miami's going to win a Super Bowl, but they could win the gold medal.
Oh, they're going to win the track meet
because they are legitimately attractive.
Could you imagine being a linebacker trying to chase those guys?
Too.
I do. That's why I'm the Mike. I'm going to have to be there and be the Mike McDaniel coach of this fantasy team. I'm going to have my vape pen on the side on Sunday, just watching the team. I'm not going to do that, but I will have I'll wear some glasses and a hat at least.
Some other catch up here. Jerick McKinnon, Dak Prescott, Zay Jones. That rounds out round 10. And then to start round 11, Jacoby Myers, Rashad Penny, Alan Lazard, Rashee Rice, Tank Bigsby, and the Marcus goes with Nico Collins.
Yeah. Look, the Texans are probably going to have to throw the ball because they're probably going to be losing a lot. And Nico Collins looks like the main target. It's probably him and Dalton Schultz, the guy who takes most of those targets there in Houston. So kind of getting him as a reserve wide receiver, a guy that I can use certainly in bye weeks. And, likely if somebody, hopefully nobody gets hurt, but if say somebody does, look, it's not a great team, but he's their team's wide receiver 1. And that counts for something, especially at this point in the draft.
Adam Thielen goes immediately after, then Darnell Mooney, then Raheem Mostert. Fitz, are you happier about this pick? You just took Dalton Schultz.
No, not really. It's not really an exciting pick at all. But with George Kittle a little hobbled at the moment, I figured I needed a week 1 option just in case Kittle's not ready to go. And as Marcus just mentioned, I mean, the door's pretty wide open for Schultz to be one of the top targets in the Texans' offense. Not that means much.
Yeah, Fitz, this draft has really gotten away from you, apparently. Chigga goes next. Chigga goes next. He a Turk.
Oh, that makes me mad. That was
Kendrick
my
Miller here to end round 11. Then Roschon Johnson. So a couple rookie running backs here at the 11-12 turn for Andrew Pizzola. Marcus, I'm just curious your opinion. Roschon Johnson is a popular kind of zero RB target, a guy that people think could take the lead in that backfield as the season goes on. Are you in on Roschon?
Not really. I mean, for me in that backfield, it's sort of Khalil Herbert or nothing. I think I know people love Roschon Johnson, and this was a dude who was a good college running back. He just had the misfortune of playing on the same team as Bijan Robinson. I I just think it's going to be a harder road for him to get consistent touches. Like, I appreciate everybody's optimism. I just don't really share it with him.
That's very fair. Pat, you took Michael Gallup here in round 12. Maybe a more fun pick?
Yeah, I mean, there
you?
just aren't many wide receivers left who are exciting. And I think Gallup has shown us he's pretty talented. He's probably realistically an injury away from being fantasy viable. But like if there were to be an injury to either Lamb, who I already have, or Brandon Cooks, like I think Gallup would instantly be a guy you would consider starting in fantasy leagues. And I just didn't like all the other stuff left at wide receiver. And I think there are so many decent running backs left. There will be one coming back to me in the next round.
Kirk Cousins goes after the Gallup pick, then Damien Harris, then Kenneth Gainwell. Then, speaking of players that need an injury to be viable, Marcus takes Tyler Algier. Do you see him as a contributor even with Bijan healthy?
I do. I know that the moment they drafted Bijan, everybody was like, yep, that's it. It's a wrap. Bijan's the guy, right? And like, I understand, right? You're talking about the most talented running back in that draft class going to a place that wants to run the football, which, by the way, I still think it's weird that the son of the founder of FedEx loves the ground game, but that's me.
You were waiting all show for that one, weren't you?
Oh, I've been waiting so long to use that. Absolutely. It's been in my back pocket the whole time. But here's the thing. I think everything you've read and heard suggests that Algier's not completely going away. I mean, they love him. He was pressed in to serve his last year, and I thought he did an admirable job, all things considered. Yeah, Bijan's going to get a ton of snaps and a lot of touches, but everything says that, I think Peter King was saying the other day, like sort of warning fantasy managers, like, hey, don't overdraft Bijan. The underlying thing being Tyler Algier's still going to have a role in this offense. So it's worth kind of taking the shot on him. And again, the way I've sort of built this roster has kind of been almost a zero RB sort of thing, right? When you look at Pierce and Connor, I get Jalen Warren, who, is an injury away from a big workload. And same with Tyler Algier. If something were to happen to Bijan, there's a big workload right there. So it sort of fits with how I put this team together.
Joe takes his fourth straight rookie. He went Charbonnet, A-Chain, Rashee Rice, and then now Dalton Kincaid.
This is going to be a hell of a dynasty league for me in a couple of years. Yeah. Really looking forward to this team. But I think more to that point too, I could either take rookies who could hit late in drafts, right? If A-Chain slowly becomes the explosive guy out of this backfield, that's great. If Dalton Kincaid ends up working out of the slot a lot and getting a lot of opportunities, that's awesome. Or I could take retread guys that I know are not going to help me, like Donovan Peoples-Jones or Curtis Samuel. Like, those guys are not going to help me this year. I just don't think they are. So I think, we're looking at the board. It's like, who would I rather? I can pick up those guys off the waiver wire. That's fine if it ends up going bust for some of these rookies. But this is that point too, where I have to give myself some depth at tight end, because if Kincaid does not work out, I'm going to take Greg Dulcich, who, between the two of them, I hope that I have a tight end that I feel good about starting every week. That's kind of, I think the pivot where I like to take two of those guys. Chig Okonkwo was the gun that I'd like to take, especially with that Treylon Burks injury, because I felt like, all right, this is a good setup here early for Chig to maybe establish himself. But apparently, that was not in the cards for me in this draft. However, Dulcich, Kincaid at that good value, Chig Okonkwo, even Cole Kmet was, still on my radar. I think there's some guys there late that have upside. Gerald Everett, can be okay at the end of the day, just not a lot of targets for him. So he's going to be a little touchdown dependent. But at the end of these drafts, if you end up punting tight end as I did, I think it's always good to take two and just hope that you do that and it works out right. I did that a couple years ago, and it worked out with a guy named Dalton Schultz. So all is well for me.
Marcus takes Marvin Mims here in the middle of round 13, which is one of my favorite picks in the draft, particularly after the Jerry Jeudy injury, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I actually was looking – I had a couple guys in mind. One of them was Jonathan Mingo, and he went the pick right before. So, Cooper Mack had Jonathan Mingo. So I'm like, all right, well, then I guess I can make the pivot. One, because I really have tried to make it a point to draft more rookies, and I didn't have one on this roster. But again, another situation where there are potentially targets. You mentioned Jerry Jeudy's injury. I know that a lot of the rookie scouting models sort of liked him, maybe not in a huge way, but just enough. So I'm willing to kind of take the shot on him at this point. I mean, Joe talking about drafting for upside, right? This is another potential upside draft here.
I love anybody that Sean Payton trades up to get if they're an offensive skill player. And then Fitz, you took Devin Singletary with your final pick. Just to get a running back or a guy that you are kind of, in on?
Yeah, needed a depth piece. Yeah, needed a depth piece. Turnabout is fair play with Marcus getting, the backup to Najee Harris. I figured I'd get the backup to Damian Pierce's backup. And a guy who, I think is going to get some run without question. Pierce is the guy. No question about that. Maybe we thought it was going to be more of a 50-50 type thing. I don't think we're going to get that now, but do think Singletary's still pretty valuable handcuff.
So if you look at the summary here of the draft board, Fitz will be shocked to hear he's not projected in last. He's projected 10th out of 12. Joey P is projected 4th, and Marcus 5th. So back-to-back, very close. Kyle, who had the number 1 overall pick in the draft, is projected number 1. And then Super Laser Seth, the guy you called out, Joey, as a guy you liked, he's projected 2nd. So what was kind of your big takeaway here, Joe?
Well, look, if you're in these PPR drafts, I think drafting at the bottom is a good thing. If you have those opportunities to take your draft spot, if you can get Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase with the 1 or 2, that's awesome. And if you can't, get down to 11 or 12 and double up on those big time wide receivers, because I do think, the pool is every year the pool is different at the positions. And then preseason happens and we start to change our opinions on guys, and then guys get hurt. And all of a sudden, I think the one thing that we're being correctly reactionary to at this stage is there was a bunch of guys there in the middle at wide receiver that you felt pretty good about taking some shots on. And then there were some guys that have gotten a lot of helium lately that have moved up where now they have to really return their draft stock. That means that paying for the sure thing guys makes things a whole lot easier on your draft because there will be running back value. You saw also, the Jonathan Taylor and Jacobs drafting, getting, I think falling further in the draft tells you that's a decision that you're going to have to make at some point if you want to get in that business or not. And I know some people are going to. I just can't get there right now. It's not enough of a discount for me. But I'm happy with the 4th spot here. I'll take this. Of course, it's funny. I thought it was going to give me a reach. Instead, it gave me a steal on Rashee Rice. So there you go. I'm very pleased about that. So Draft Wizard at the end of the day actually is not hating on me too much. I'm looking at the expert opinions. It says Bo McBriar of Fantasy Pros likes my draft, which is great, but Scott Pianowski hates me. He gave me a D-. So I'm sorry, Scott.
Scott's generally kind of grouchy.
He's a grouchy.
So that's on
but we love Scott because he's joining us here on the Fest, and we loved him. He joined us earlier.
Yes, of course.
Appreciate
Scott's
it.
No, Scott is super awesome.
Yeah,
we love Scott.
Marcus, in looking at yours in the steals and reaches section, it says that you didn't get any steals, but you did have 3 reaches: Damian Pierce, James Conner, and Jalen Warren. I'm not sure I agree with those. I think Pierce and Conner around 5 and 6, that seems pretty reasonable to me.
I think so. And I think basically because of the way I built my roster, I don't think they were reaches. I think, they sort of came right on time for what I was trying to do with this roster. So I'm overall happy with it. I will say that last pick, I took Marvin Mims. Mostly because it's a shorter bench, at least for the purposes of this mock draft. Because I really, really had my eye on Sam Laporta, who's been a guy I've been drafting a lot. But just because of this, it didn't make sense to take a second tight end when you already have Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
Had the rosters been a little bit deeper, the bench has been a little bit deeper, I for sure would have done what I've done in a lot of drafts and taken Laporta as a second tight end option.
After seeing how the draft played out for you, Marcus, are there any of the kind of earlier middle round picks you wish you had back? Maybe not one of those 3 straight receivers rounds 2 to 4, or are you pretty happy with kind of your strategy that you went in here with?
If I could do it over again, I would have taken James Cook instead of James Conner. Like I said, I was keeping my fingers crossed that maybe Cook would come back to me, but Joey P made sure that wasn't going to be a possibility. So if I could do it over again, that's the one I probably would have flipped.
And then Fitz, I mentioned that you are not actually projected for last, but you are projected for 10th. I assume there's a few picks you'd like back.
Oh,
wow,
deservedly so. Starting with the one in the late ninth round, when I decided to take Brian Robinson Jr. over Rashad Bateman. And it was from that point on, the rest of my draft was like that Simpsons episode where Sideshow Bob is stepping on the rakes in every direction that he turns on. It's nothing went right after that for me. It was just horrible. And Ryan, I was forced to reckon with the possibility that when I looked at the expert opinions, I might pan my own draft. I thought it might be me being one of the guys who hated my draft, but it wasn't. But Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros hated my draft. Thanks, D-Bro. Appreciate it, buddy.
No shock there. First of all, fun fact: I've never seen an episode of The Simpsons.
Oh,
Second,
Show's been on for 35 years. But how?
well, so when I was younger, it was like, I wasn't allowed to watch kind of older person television. And by the time I got older, it was like, they're on season 20 or whatever. And
I admittedly haven't watched it in probably like 15 years myself, so it's fine.
I respect it. I know it's great. I just haven't seen it. Fitz, that's a tough one. I mean, to be fair, Fitz, your start, I love doubling up wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. I'm not the biggest Najee Harris guy, but I like taking an RB1 in late round 3, then getting Lamar. I mean, you started off really strong. It was just that back half where you started to not like what you were doing so much, right?
Yeah, that was it. And normally in the latter portion of the draft, I can always find guys I'm excited about taking. And this time the well just ran dry on me. It was tough.
What was your grade, Pat?
C.
Marcus, what was your grade?
Yeah.
I got a B.
B, and then Joe?
I also got a B, but it must have been a better B than Marcus's B because I'm one spot
Apparently,
ahead
it
of
was a slightly better B. I got an 84 out of 100.
I got an 86. And I think, Draft Wizard typically is I always feel like a little RB heavy, no matter what it is. And understandably so, because, that pool, once you get out of there, there's a little scary swimming. But I think that this year in particular, and we keep talking about every draft show, and every draft show keeps unfolding, that there's a value somewhere between rounds 5 and round 7 of all these fascinating guys who have a ton of talent and a ton of opportunity. Javonte Williams, if he's healthy enough. I got Breece Hall later, Cam Akers, Alexander Madison, James Cook, right? Antonio Gibson, who, by the way, was RB12 in PPR in 2021 and 2020. And I know last year didn't work out, but still, there's a bunch of dudes out there that if you go heavy wide receiver, or you do take the quarterback early, or you do take Kelsey or Andrews or Hawkinson or someone early like that, you can make up ground this year at running back, in my opinion. I would do it in bulk, and I would buy in bulk in order to do that, because I think that's the safer way to do it. So maybe instead of just getting 2 guys you feel good about, maybe get 3, just to give yourself an out and a little better chance of success. But that, to me, is what the board looks like. And I think the board's always very fluid coming into the year. And then it starts to take its shape. And I think by now, as we get really towards the end of draft season, you have a pretty good idea of where the values are. And once again, we saw it unfold in this draft. If you look exactly how it happened, you see these guys going there, and you see those are the teams that kind of benefited, the ones who took wide receiver early and often. They were at the top. The team that I liked, right, at 11, and the team that had Justin Jefferson, both above me, and I was somebody who went 3 straight wide receivers too. So get those wide receivers. That's where the NFL is right now. Try to lock in those players. I got to say, look at the roster too. I would go to war with this squad, even though there's a lot of youth on this team. I think my veteran leadership can have a good influence in this locker room.
Marcus, do you
good locker room guy? Good character guy.
Yeah, I'm a good character. I'm a good character.
Yeah. Marcus, do you like picking in that 106 range, or do you prefer to be on either end?
I'd rather be on the ends. But we got to sort of, at least I know for us, we got to pick our slots, and I purposely chose kind of a middle slot just to see how things are going to go, how that build was going to go. And on the whole, I'm not dissatisfied with what happened there, but I do think, I think statistically it's shown that if you're in that 1 or 2 spot, you have a better chance of winning your league historically. But I do think at the end, because as Joe mentioned, you can double up on wide receivers. You can sort of at least dictate how the following round or 2 will go after that. So I think there's some value to being in the late spots too.
Fitz, do you have a favorite spot to pick from in the first round?
I actually like patrolling the middle. And Marcus and I were picking together in the Kings Classic draft in Canton, Ohio a couple of weeks ago. And I think I was at 101. And if I recall correctly, Marcus, you were kind of close to me, like 103 or 104 or something like that.
I think I was at 3, yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
And it just, especially in a 14-teamer, man, that is a lot of picks that go by if you are on an end. And there are entire just tiers, multiple tiers can come off the board by the time you pick once more. So it's really tough to be on an end in a league like that. But generally, I kind of like the middle.
Marcus, I want to get your opinion here before we wrap up, just on some specific players. And specifically, I want to ask about the rookie wide receiver, because it feels like every year now, one of these first-round wide receivers comes in and is something of a league winner, because they go later because it's a little bit of the unknown. You don't know what to expect. And then one of these guys pops, if not multiple of these guys pops, In this particular mock draft, the order of those first round rookie receivers went Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then Quentin Johnston. In your opinion, is that the right order for those guys? And did they go in roughly the right rounds they should have? Or would you be maybe a little more or less aggressive on them or mix up that order at all?
I think round wise, I think everything was fine. I would say I would put Addison ahead of Flowers. I think I get it. I think because the one we have seen most recently was Zay Flowers. He had that game on, was it Monday night? I think it was, where he scored the touchdown. I mean, literally, side note, I wasn't watching it, but I did see on my Twitter timeline like the video over and over again with everybody like heart eyes and rocket ships and stuff, and I'm like, it was a nice play. I'm like, where was the defense on that one? Like in and of itself, I thought it was sort of it was more about the defense not being there than anything Zay Flowers did, but everybody on fantasy Twitter went berserk. So, all right, great. But I think that is why you see him going earlier, but I still think that Jordan Addison is probably going to be the number one rookie wide receiver this year. I would have put JSN sort of in that category, but the injury I think is going to sort of prevent that from happening. So, but I get the Zay Flowers hype. I just would have taken Addison.
Can I just say, Ryan, real quick? Before that clip dropped, I was rocket ships and star eye emojis on Zay Flowers. So anybody who already loved him and you saw that, and Marcus isn't wrong, like defenses this time of year are still putting things together. Fitzy knows that too. Like, always the first couple weeks, especially if you play in those IDP leagues, like those guys are just trying to, figure out who's going to be where and what the systems are and things like that. So they're kind of shaking the dust off a lot of times. However, I think Zay Flowers is going to be that dude. And I am mad, straight up mad that I did not get him in this draft. This is the first time in a while that somebody was able to, in a real draft or mock, get him before me. And it's probably my own fault. I blame myself. However, at the end of the day, plant your flag on your guys, everybody. Like if you're watching this, if you've done your homework, if you've listened to the shows, if you're listening to Marcus's show, if you're listening to, Fantasy Pro shows or wherever, whatever research you're doing, at the end of the day, get your guys if you believe in them, because that's what makes fantasy football fun. And Zay Flowers is my dude, and I believe in the guy. I believe in the talent. And I think that with Lamar, it's going to be a special connection. But that's the great thing, is that I would love to do a live watch back of some of these mock drafts next year and make fun of each other for the things that we say and do and see how right or wrong we are and look back on these teams. I want them graded after the season, not before, Ryan. That's what I want.
It's a great idea. I will say just very quickly on Zay, he is also the type of receiver that will dominate one-on-ones in camp. Like you see all these videos of him like, oh, he just put his defender into a blender. Like that's kind of what he does. It's not going to be in that situation in training camp. Don't let that, take away from the hype around him, because I do love him. But yeah, Marcus, any kind of final thoughts, just philosophically, what you're going into drafts attempting to do, last minute advice for the listeners who have their drafts this weekend?
I would just say that kind of a thing I always say, right? I still believe in the Bruce Lee, be like water strategy, just because you never really know how things are going to go. So, what was it, the Mike Tyson line? Like everybody has a strategy until they get punched in the mouth. Like everybody has a strategy until all of a sudden, 3 quarterbacks have gone off the board in the second round. You're like, well, what do I do now? So just sort of be aware, kind of see what's going on, make sure you're feeling the board out. And then kind of, don't get yourself locked into one strategy, because all it takes is a couple of draft picks going sideways and then you're suddenly thrown off kilter.
Everybody who tuned in to all 6 hours of this, thank you so much for joining us for Fantasy Fest 2023, presented by Betting Pros. Joe, can you thank all the guests? Because I'm going to forget some of these names. Scott, Paul, Justin,
I think
Marcus.
I have an entire list here, so I'm going to roll through everybody and thank everybody. First of all, I want to thank our amazing team for putting all the pre-tape together and putting all the live stuff. So Chris, Bill, Michael, John, everybody on the back end, they're making this work. Also, let's thank all of our guests: Jake Seeley, Jeff Ratcliffe, Jim Sanis, James Coe, Jennifer Akins, Josh Larkey, Billy Muzio. We had, of course, Alfredo Brown joining us, Scott Pianowski, Paul Charchian, Tara Roberts, Justin Boone, and this fella here, Marcus Grant, and of course, all the great hosts here, Ryan. We had Andrew Erickson, Fitz, Debro. Everybody was here. Even Sam made it onto the show finally, after all the attempts that we've been trying to get Sam on a show. So thank goodness that all worked out finally. But again, thank you everybody for watching. It's been a great day of fantasy football. You can always check out the best of the fest too. Don't forget, there's an audio version where we clip everything down, or you could just sit around, get some snacks, and watch all 8 billion hours of Fantasy Fest, which I recommend. I think it's going to be a great time. But Ryan, take us home, baby. This one's your ship tonight.
Yeah, just wrapping it up. So thank you again to everybody that Joe just mentioned. I appreciate you going to do that for me. Be sure to check out Draft Wizard, whether it's just Mock Draft Simulator or the Cheat Sheet Creator or the Draft Assistant or Draft Intel, which I think is, like, quite frankly, the best tool in the entire industry. Draft Intel is amazing. All that fun stuff. We have it. Thank you so much for joining us. For Joe and Fitz and Marcus and everybody else, I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you guys again next time.